looked amazing after I got ready. I had so much fun at the pageant.
She's been competing since she was 2.
As soon as she did her first national pageant, she was just winning everything. She was just a performer.
I was meant to be one. Come with me on my pageant weekend.
Hi, I'm Jo Bailey, forensic trained clinical psychologist, and this is part 3 of my JonBenet Ramsey series. If you haven't seen part 1 or part 2, I will link them in the description section below, but you don't have to watch these in order. If you've just stumbled across this video, you can pick up here. The only continuity that would be missing is that at the end of part 2, I speak about my conclusion, who I think did this. It is not the parents, not a very popular decision with some people. And people are very passionate about this, as am I. But the truth is, none of us really know. So I am speculating as much as anyone. But I concluded that it wasn't the parents, that this crime was done by an intruder, possibly 2 men. And I put forth some evidence, some reasoning why it could be 2 men. So this video is going to pick up from there. I'm going to look at 2 men, the criminal profile of these 2 men who represent a bunch of other perverted men, depraved minds such as them. In fact, there were 38 registered sex offenders, sexual predators living in the very area that JonBenet resided at the time of her death. So these profiles could be of anyone, but these 2 men are Gary Oliva and Michael Helgoth. Now, I know at times I mispronounce their names. The truth is, these guys are the scum of the earth, so I really don't care if I mispronounce their names. You know who I'm talking about. So I'm going to look at their criminal profiles, and I'm going to look at the broader problem of these child beauty pageants and ask the very specific question: would JonBenet Ramsey still be alive if not for her participation in these pageants? So let's start with Gary Oliva. He was a known sexual offender. He was a pervert, and he had a history of violence. I believe at one point I read somewhere, maybe you can help me out on this, but he had an attempt of strangling his own mother. I haven't looked into that, but I did read that somewhere. Point is, he has a history of violence, and he has this tendency to be excited by looking at little girls, and he did have a fascination with JonBenet. We know right after the murder, he contacted his high school friend, Michael Vale, and he was reportedly distraught on the phone to Michael, crying and sobbing and confessing that he had done something terrible, that he had hurt a little girl. Gary was busted in 2016 with 695 images of child pornography, and 335 of those related to JonBenet. He was convicted of these offences, and he spent 8 years in prison. And during his time in prison, he wrote a letter to his same high school friend, Michael Vale. And in this letter, he wrote, "I never loved anyone like I did JonBenet, and yet I let her slip, and her head bashed in half, and I watched her die." Police treated this as a confession of sorts and investigated him. His DNA was not found at the crime scene. We know there was foreign DNA, another person's DNA. In fact, I believe there was 2 foreign DNAs found at the crime scene. But ultimately, Gary was ruled out as a suspect. Now, whilst Gary's written confession was never substantiated by the police, it does align with a criminal profile. A profile that, to me, would suggest he is a schizophrenic with perverse and violent pedophilic tendencies. Gary served his time in prison, and he was released last year in 2024. Now, I believe he has to check in with Denver police as part of his parole conditions once a month. Again, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure I read that it's just a once a month check-in. Now, what this means is in between those check-ins, he's transient. No one really knows where he is. Yes, he's meant to have a stable address, but I also heard that the place he was residing in, his registered address, he hadn't shown for a while. Look, I don't know what's happening there. This is not the point of the video, but it is so concerning to me that people like this can just wander amongst us. It's not like 8 years in prison will just change these people. They need to be monitored and they need to be watched. And aside from these monthly police check-ins as part of his parole, he's free to do what he wants. That's a very frightening thought. And then there is the second man that I have referenced, Michael Helgoth, who also had a bit of a fascination with young girls. Well, maybe not a bit, a lot of a fascination. But he also had a fascination with this morbid, sadistic element. He spoke to a workmate, I believe, about crushing a human skull, what that would be like. And we know that JonBenet's head was hit with a blunt force object, so much so and caused intracranial hemorrhage. Now, JonBenet would have died of that head injury, or she would have died of the strangulation. I know, to digress a little, there's been a bit of argument about what happened first. The autopsy said they happened almost simultaneously. Some people think the intracranial injury happened first, or others think the strangulation. It really is semantics at this point. Either injury would have killed her, but there is the possibility that maybe two people were involved. Maybe one strangled her whilst the other hit her. I don't know, but these are possibilities. Michael was implicated in the case after someone had alerted police that just before JonBenet's murder, Michael had been talking about coming into a large sum of money around Christmas time. He also had a pair of the high-tech boots. The imprint was found at the crime scene, although the size did not match. He had a fascination with stun guns and owned a stun gun. There was a whole bunch of other things there with Michael that might have linked him. However, the FBI asked Boulder Police to put out a public announcement that they were honing in on the perpetrator. And soon after that announcement went out, Michael Helgoth was found dead. There's a curious situation around his death, and it's a very suspicious death. It's also possible that he was murdered. It's, in fact, perhaps more than likely he was murdered. And I question, if there were two men and the police were honing in, did Michael panic? Did the other perpetrator get scared that Michael was going to confess or slip up and murder him? I don't know, and it's not really the purpose of this video, but these are the things that we have to consider. And however he died, we know it was in suspicious circumstances. And whilst no police evidence links Helgoth to JonBenet's crime either, his criminal profile, which is a combination of sadism and opportunistic criminality, makes him, in my opinion, a very compelling suspect. So both Gary and Michael had similar perverse interests, and I don't know if they knew each other. I think it would be really intriguing to investigate that more. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. People like this are known to operate in rings, to have underground communities, and to share images with each other. And given they were in very close proximity to each other, it's not a long bow to draw to think maybe there was some connection. Maybe they knew each other. I don't know if that has been explored or investigated, but it's something I'll probably go and look into after this video, because to me it is pretty important to know. But there is something I need to digress with here briefly, because I can't make sense of it. There was a second assault on another little girl who was referred to as Amy. I believe it's a pseudonym. It was not her real name, but it's Amy's case. Now, her assault happened just 9 months after the JonBenet Ramsey case. And it is so similar. The MO, everything about it is so similar that it's really hard to just wipe it off as a coincidence. Amy went to the same dance school as JonBenet. The intruder snuck into Amy's family home whilst they were out. When the mother came home with Amy, she says that she put on the security code of the house and no one came in after that. So they had to have snuck in before they got home, which means the intruder lay in wait for several hours. Does this sound familiar? This is something a lot of people argue with the intruder theory, because they say the intruder would not have been able to have time to write the note or look around the house. Well, they would have if they were in the house for several hours whilst the Ramseys were out.
Circumstances were very similar. I believe that that creature came into our home when we were gone. They had gone out, come back, set the burglar alarm, and gone to bed. So he obviously was in the house when they got home. And that's what I believe happened in our case.
So in this case, it's very, very similar. And the only difference here is that Amy's mother heard some noise and came into the bedroom and interrupted the assault. The intruder fled out the window over a balcony and was not caught. Now, the police coincidentally bungled this investigation also. Important DNA was discarded. I believe it was the bed sheets. Other DNA wasn't tested. Now, I do have some graphic information which I can't put into this video, but there was an opportunity to get some form of fluid DNA. And I don't know why, but this did not happen. Amy's mother also wanted to do a sketch drawing or get the police to provide a sketch drawing of the intruder, but this didn't happen also. Now, I don't know why. This case seems, at the surface, so similar to JonBenet's case that could it be a coincidence? To me, this is just too much of a coincidence. It doesn't make sense. And the reason I mention it in this video is because Amy also was a child who went to a dance school. In fact, the dance school JonBenet and Amy went to had a balcony over the area where the little girls danced in their costumes. So basically, families, friends, or anyone for that matter could go up to the public balcony and watch the girls dance. I mean, it is possible that these perverted men were actually there watching from time to time. Scary. So that brings me directly to the elephant in the room, JonBenet's participation in child beauty pageants. Now, these events are so polarizing, and I imagine some people will not like what I have to say. Critics, and I am one of these critics, will say that these kind of pageants sexualize very young girls and attract the wrong kind of people, making them targets for sexual predators. Advocates, on the other hand, are going to defend these pageants and say it's great for self-esteem and the girls have fun, it's all very innocent, and that it's just a few depraved minds that ruin it for everyone. Now, I wish I lived in a world that naive, that ignorant, that blissful. I really do. So maybe I've just worked in my line of work too long. Maybe I've been around too many criminals in too many prisons. That is highly possible. Maybe my sample and my worldview is skewed. But let's get real. From a forensic psychology point of view, a child beauty pageant is a pedophile's dream, and it's going to attract deviant-minded individuals with perverted tendencies. And we cannot get past that point. No matter how well-intended a parent is, no matter how innocent and playful the event is for the child, there will be a group of people that are attracted to these things for all the wrong reasons. And to me, that is a scary point. It's a point that I would not want to get past as a parent. So what I want to ask is, was the exposure of JonBenet in these pageants the element that inadvertently placed her in harm's way, placed her as a target for whoever did this to her, assuming it wasn't an intruder? If not for her participation in these events, would JonBenet still be alive? And I guess a secondary question is, where does responsibility lie? Do parents, or should parents, be held somewhat accountable, albeit for innocent actions, but negligence that ends in tragedy because of the perverse mind of others? I mean, I don't hold that view, but where does the accountability lie? Is it more of a social responsibility? Should these child beauty pageants be allowed to happen at all? Should they be banned? Or does responsibility lie solely with the hands of those who commit these crimes? Should responsibility be shared? I guess it's an important question to ask, because if these pageants do attract, albeit a very small portion of deviant individuals, we have to take responsibility as a society and decide, what do we do about it? Is it okay to say, well, it only happens once or twice here and there, therefore it's all right? Or do we take a bit more ownership of this, take more accountability, and say we're going to protect our children from this? We're not going to participate in these events anymore. As a forensic psychologist, I have studied the behavioral patterns of these kind of individuals. I've worked with these kind of individuals, people who target children, and they often have a very complex, tragic story of their own. We know that a lot of the times these people were also abused as children, but that's no excuse, and we have to stop the pattern. Pedophiles will often exhibit patterns of seeking access to children in environments where they can observe them undetected. Just like I mentioned with the dance school where JonBenet and Amy went, there was a public area for viewing the children. This would be a really prime example of a place where a pedophile might be able to slip in, view children undetected. These kind of things have to be monitored more, surely. I think regardless of the motivations of normal parents, we can't deny that beauty pageants provide such prime opportunities for the depraved. And I look at some of these videos and my mind is blown. As a mother myself, I don't understand it, but I was never the pretty girl at school either. Trying to be a beauty queen was never my goal in life. I was the bucky-toothed, freckled girl with glasses that didn't have a lot of friends. I was the nerd. And for me, it's very hard to understand the motives and that desire to be so popular, to be so beautiful. And I think society pushes this message so heavily for women. If you look at magazines, if you look at advertising anywhere, women have to be beautiful, they have to be perfect, and this ideal needs to be broken as well. But from a psychological point of view, I know how dangerous and sinister that desire for attention, the desire to be noticed for beauty can be. None more so than when the person receiving the attention, in this case from grown, sick, twisted men, is a mere 6 years of age. I am glad I didn't grow up wanting that or knowing that. And it hurts my brain to understand what you gain from that. Surely our moral values, our character, the quality of our heart needs to be put forth over and above this desire for beauty and attention. And it scares me that potentially these beauty pageants not only attract perverted men, but also set up these unrealistic ideals for children from a very young and early age. And the scariest thing of all is that you don't know who these people are. You don't know who these perverted minds are. Now, Gary and Michael, yes, they probably would stand out in a crowd. They look a bit creepy. You'd probably take a second look at them if you walk past them. But not all pedophiles look like this. Pedophiles often exhibit traits such as charm, social status, and crafty manipulation to gain trust. Through my work, I can assure you not all pedophiles look like Gary or look scary. Some have uniforms, some have badges, and some are in very high, influential positions of power. And if you think it can't get any scarier than that, well, trust me, it does. When these powerful people who are involved in this vile and abhorrent scene are able to not only manipulate parents and children, but can manipulate systems and processes, it gets very scary and it gets very sinister and very dark quickly. Now, I'm not saying that is what happened in the JonBenet Ramsey case or the Amy case. I did watch a documentary that exposed some seedy underground activity in Boulder around the time of JonBenet's death. And with all I know, all I can do is ask, what if? So would JonBenet Ramsey still be alive if not for her participation in these pageants? Well, look, her participation in these beauty pageants undeniably placed her in the spotlight, making her known to people beyond her family and community. And that raises the chilling question, did this visibility make her a target? Would she still be alive if not for her participation in these pageants? Well, obviously this is a hypothetical question that no one can answer, but you have to wonder. And this is not to blame the parents. No one ever is to blame for a crime, except the person with the evil intent that committed the crime themselves. But we have to be aware and we have to get honest. And I think as a community, we have to take some responsibility, each and every one of us. And we have to consider the possibility that JonBenet's participation in these pageants could have raised attention from the wrong people. We have to consider that many of JonBenet's photos and videos, her very adult-like photos and videos, were already circulating and out there before her murder. We have to consider that both Gary and Michael have profiles of individuals that are drawn to pageant world, but their exact connection to JonBenet Ramsey's case remains speculative. I get that. But we also know that the media frenzy surrounding her death was fueled in part by her pageant photos, and these images that were meant to capture her talent and her charisma and her innocence were weaponized to sensationalize her case. And that raises the broader question about the role of media and societal values in cases like this. JonBenet's murder is a tragic reminder how innocence can be exploited in the most horrible of ways. And whilst we certainly can't say the pageant was the thing that caused her death, we have to acknowledge the risks that are associated with thrusting young girls into the spotlight, into the public eye, and we have to ask, is this really worth it? JonBenet Ramsey's murder and Amy's assault remain unsolved, but they remain as stark reminders of the vulnerabilities that children in the public eye, in the spotlight, will face. And this is the reason I've made this video, not only to seek justice for JonBenet Ramsey and for Amy, but to hopefully protect other children from similar tragedies. It has to start with awareness, and it has to start with discussion. We have to continue this conversation. What do you think? Are you someone who advocates for these child beauty pageants, or are you a critic like me who thinks the risk is just too high and not worth it? Well, this is the end of the 3 parts that I had prepared for this series, but I don't think I'm done. The case has got me losing sleep. I got invested in this a lot more than I thought I would, and I spent a lot more time in it than I thought I would. I mean, there's just so much information, so much detail. And if I've got little things wrong along the way, I apologize. It was never my intention, as you would know. You can just be bombarded with information. Everyone has an opinion, and these videos are all my opinion. That's all they are. I'm speculating as much as anyone in this case. I probably will go back and look at this a little bit more. I may make a video again down the track, probably around Amy, but I also didn't really get too pulled into some of the other friends. I looked briefly at Santa, Fleet White, the housekeeper. A lot of these people have been ruled out, so I really didn't bring them into my series at all, but maybe I'll go and have a look a bit further. I think wherever you look, there's some kind of suspicious element, and I think that is the fascinating thing with this case. No matter what point of view you take, there's something that you can look at a little bit more, or there's something that leaves you just curious and wanting to know what happened. So maybe I will return to this, but for now I have some other projects and works that will take up my time, and I do hope you'll join me for those also. But until then, take care of yourselves and each other, and have a very happy and peace-filled day. Bye for now.